Welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cyber criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello and welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast. This is your co-host, Zach Fuller, joined by Mike Rotondo and Lauro Chavez. And today we're talking about a subject that is near and dear to a lot of companies, a lot of leadership. And that's for those companies that have a lot going on, a lot of different subsidiaries, entities. They're multifaceted. They have different departments, product lines, and they need to understand how to run cybersecurity across the organization as a whole, as opposed to bits and pieces. So we're going to be talking about that, how to normalize, standardize your security practices, and really look at organization-wide cybersecurity when you have people working all over the world, different entities, different structures, different management styles for these subsidiaries, all that good stuff. But before we do, Mike, will you kick us off with the news?
Poor password choices continue into 2022. Don't use these passwords. These are the 10 logins most regularly found for sale online. And so basically in 2022, one would hope computer users would understand the value in creating/using complex passwords to protect their online identity from cybercrime. Statistically, that assumption is numerically false, unfortunately. Cybersecurity researchers analyzed stolen password repositories located on the dark web that are offered for sale. Over 24 billion of them. Not only did their analysis determine that the volume of stolen accounts has risen at 65% in these marketplaces, but only 6.7 billion accounts were unique, meaning that over 17 billion of the accounts were duplicates. Further, the most common passwords were simple ones like 1234556 and QWERTY. So change your passwords. A little scary here. Bluetooth signals can be used to track smartphones, say researchers. Researchers warn Bluetooth signals can be used to track device owners by a unique fingerprinting of the radio. The technique was presented by a paper presented at IEEE Security and Privacy Conference last month by researchers at the University of California, San Diego. The paper suggests that a minor manufacturing imperfections in hardware are unique with each device and cause measurable distortions, which can be used as a fingerprint to track a specific device. Chinese hackers distribute backdoored Web3 wallets for iOS and Android users. Technically sophisticated threat actor known as Seaflower has been targeting Android and iOS users as part of an extensive campaign that mimics official cryptocurrency wallet websites intending to distribute backdoored apps that drain victims' funds. Said to be the first discovered in March 2022, the cluster of activity hints to a strong relationship with a Chinese-speaking entity yet to be uncovered. Based on the macOS username, source code comments in the backdoor code, and its abuse of Alibaba's content delivery system. Targeted apps include Android and iOS versions of Coinbase Wallet, MetaMask, Token Pocket, and IamToken. A new Vital Chrome extension hides locations info that your VPN can't. A new Google Chrome browser extension called Vital prevents web pages from using programming APIs to find your geographic location even when using a VPN. While a VPN will hide the IP address of your device and thus your physical location, it is possible to use JavaScript functions to query information directly from a web browser to find a visitor's general geographic location. Last night, a developer named Zoc shared the new Vital Chrome extension on Y Combinator's Hacker News, asking readers to provide feedback on the functionality. Vital can spoof your time zone, locale, geolocation, and user agent. The data can be used to track you or reveal your location, explains Zoc in the HM Post. Vital utilizes the Chrome debugger API to spoof this data. This allows the data to be spoofed in frames, web workers, and during the initial loading of a website. It also makes the spoofing completely undetectable. Might be good if you want to be snooping around stuff that you shouldn't be looking at.
But it is an extension. Do we trust extensions? I don't know. We talked about that last time. Is it trustworthy?
I don't know, man. This is Google's not writing this. This is just some hacker named Zoc. So
yeah,
probably a bad idea to install this extension, right? Without extensive reverse engineering of the code, so you can make sure you know what that extension's doing.
You'd better off just use a VPN and Tor if it's you want to be that secretive. So
yep.
Linux malware deemed nearly impossible to detect. A new Linux malware that's nearly impossible to detect called Symbiote, discovered in November, parasitically infects running processes so it can steal credentials, gain rootkit functionality, and install a backdoor for remote access. Researchers from the BlackBerry Research and Intelligence team have been tracking the malware, and the earliest detection of which is from November 2021. Security researcher Joachim Kennedy wrote the blog post on the BlackBerry Threat Vector blog published last week. What makes Symbiote different is that it needs to infect other running processes to inflict damage on infected machines. Instead of being a standalone executable file that is run to infect the machine, it is a shared object library that is loaded into all running processes using LD_preload and parasitically infects the machine. Symbiote's behavior isn't the only thing that makes it unique, researchers said. It's also highly evasive to such a degree that it's extremely difficult to know if it's even being used by threat actors at all. So Symbiote, some of its basic tactics it uses is that by design it is loaded by the linker via the LD preload directive, which allows it to be loaded before any other shared objects. So this thing is pretty nasty, and there is no way to fix it that I saw in the article, but check it out. You're running a lot of Linux. And with that, there's a couple other headlines. There's a Office 365 feature that can help cloud ransomware attacks. There's a Citrix fixed a critical flaw in Citrix App Dev Manager. Cisco secure email bug can let attackers bypass authentication. There's all sorts of bad stuff going on out there. But anyway, with that, Laura, what do we got?
We've had quite a bit of things move forward in the exploit realm since we last had an episode. But before I get into the exploits for today, I just want to remind everybody that the reason that we give this exploit information is so that if you are overwhelmed with vulnerability remediations and you've got your scanners running and they're coming back with just a lot of information and you're essentially overworking your IT teams to just focus on patching. I like to bring the exploits into the conversation along with Mike's awesome news, because what really makes a vulnerability dangerous, there's lots of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are always going to be found in software, right? There's always software bugs, software weaknesses, especially with that vendor. So keep that in mind. And what really makes a vulnerability dangerous is when you have the exploit code that allows for the taking advantage of the vulnerability. So I like to use an analogy like a vulnerability is like having a window in a house, a glass window. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything if you live on the planet rubber where nothing's hard. However, the moment that you find something hard like a piece of steel or a rock that'll break the window, now it truly becomes a risk, because in the environment that we have something that can take advantage of that vulnerability and break into that piece of software that has this vulnerability with its exploit. So keep that in mind. If a vulnerability is out there, you certainly want to patch, but you want to also try to alleviate your team's overwork by doing some vulnerability re-ranking. And hopefully this exploit news helps you with that. So, is a vulnerability important to patch? Yes. If it has an exploit with it, more importantly to patch. So keep that in mind as you kind of structure your vulnerability work inside. So let's get with some of the vulnerabilities that have exploits this week. I've got two for you to talk about. The first one here is from Confluence. So if you're familiar with the Atlassian suite of products, Confluence Data Center is something that's used for data backups and data aggregation, those sorts of things. And there's a really, really, really clever remote code execution payload that's been created in Python by a notorious hacker, Hebox. And this is out there available for everybody to download and use against Confluence Data Center. So if you're running Confluence 7.4 all the way to 7.18, you're vulnerable to this remote code execution. This is unauthenticated. So if somebody gets an idea of how your Confluence system is set up, they're probably going to be able to exploit this if you get indexed on Shodan or something like that. So keep that in mind. If you're running Confluence from Atlassian, make sure that you're updating. The other one I want to talk about briefly is from one of the vendors that I love talking about so much because they're so perfect. This is from Microsoft. You might have heard of the Felina. This is a Microsoft rich text file document that has hidden HTML in it that using a preview will download. So this is a 0-day that Microsoft has still yet to patch. Big surprise. So make sure that you're at least making your people aware to be leery of any types of documents that are coming down in RTF format, and even set up maybe some of your filters to start blocking documents that are in this RTF format to help you with the Felina attack. So as always, patch your systems and make sure that you're looking for the exploitable vulnerabilities, because those are the ones that are really critical. And with that, Zach, what are we talking about today? Something fun, something has to do with companies that are in a very interesting situation with a lot of subsidiaries all around the world. maybe.
Yeah, that's the standard now, right? As companies grow, and a lot of them kind of keep their IT and security professionals where they are, and not giving them a lot of extra resources. So, especially in the changing economy, you have these companies that struggle with this, right? They have maybe a small IT team, and they have a bunch of different subsidiaries, different locations. Each one of their companies that they own in a subsidiary model, or they have a joint venture with, or whatever, might have its own structure, right? Its own culture, the way it runs, and some are more stringent than others. Different industries, even, right, where you have different compliance requirements. So the question today is, how do we tie it all together from the top level, right? From the parent company that's often providing IT and security services to all these subsidiaries. How do we look at that from the top? How do we manage across these different cultures, different environments? So we're going to dive into that, but before we do, let's take a quick commercial break.
Want even more Cyber Rants? Be sure to subscribe to the Cyber Rants podcast. Get your copy of our best-selling book, Cyber Rants, on Amazon today. This podcast is brought to you by Silent Sector, the firm dedicated to building world-class cybersecurity programs for mid-market and emerging companies across the U.S. Silent Sector also provides industry-leading penetration tests and cyber risk assessments. Visit silentsector.com and contact us today.
And we're back. So we're diving right into how do companies manage across their different subsidiaries, different cultures, all of that. And I wanted to start with assessments and get your thoughts. Get your wizardry, your insight into how do we take an organization with a lot of subsidiaries that's very disjointed, or not disjointed, wrong word, but very separated geographically and even by industries and such. And how do we look at cybersecurity as a whole, starting with the assessment side? How do we assess that organization and understand what's what across the board in order to create a roadmap to improvement? Any thoughts there?
Sure. I certainly have a few thoughts on that. I think, as the parent organization, right, if you've got a lot of subsidiaries, the first thing to do is to put all of those subsidiaries in buckets, right? Are they fintech? Are they government tech? Are they just business to business tech? And once you can kind of throw them into where they fall with their silo of business, then you can kind of start to be prescriptive with the type of governance framework that's going to apply to that organization.
Makes sense. And then would you recommend then treating an assessment as per product line or subsidiary, or would you run an assessment against a major framework, say NIST, CSF, or ISO 27001? Would you run it across the organization as a whole? What are the pros and cons of each method?
Well, the first thing I would do is back up and say, where is their infrastructure, right? Is it a centralized infrastructure that everybody uses, or do they all have their own? And it will, depending on the answer to that question, that will determine how you're going to be able to proceed with the risk assessment. So if you got a makeup company owns a fintech company that owns a movie studio, you're going to have decentralized. You would hope you would have at least decentralized systems and infrastructure, other than perhaps they may have shared AD. They may have, it all depends on how the infrastructure is built and determined. Now, you're going to take each subsidiary based on whatever governance is required, but you're still going to have to go back to that parent company, again, based on the infrastructure. So the primary focus or initial focus for each subsidiary is going to be physical security. They'd start there and then build out, and then you're going to look at the infrastructure of the parent, and you're going to assess going down from there. And then at least that's the way I would carve it up.
Yeah, no, good stuff, Mike. I think, you'd asked about the pros and cons, doing a massive framework, gap assessment against everything that you own might be too much to bite off. Not that it's not possible, but it's going to show your risk, being really high in a lot of areas more than likely. And so, there's the pro that to that approach to at least give you, a total oversight of all the businesses and where they fall against a given framework. The truth is that may not work if you've got a lot of subsidiaries. And, we've had clients like this in the past that have lots of subsidiaries in all different places, and some of them in tech, some of them in, software delivery, software development, things like that. And so, maybe taking a kind of a pie approach, right, where you slice the pie up and you do these small assessments against these organizations, determine where they are from a risk perspective, get them an improvement plan, moving forward, and then go to the next one. And as you kind of do these little slices all the way around, eventually you'll have a total understanding of where the risk lies with these organizations. But you make a good point, Mike. Where's the infrastructure being taken care of? And I think a lot of times, at least in the experience that we have with some of the clients we see, a lot of the infrastructure is owned by each individual subsidiary. They're doing their own thing. They've got their own budgets. They've got their own software. They've got their own personnel and their own kind of methodologies that they use to keep their business moving. And this overarching, kind of governance is certainly owned by the parent company, but they're kind of like they're kind of in a position where, well, we need to secure these businesses. We need to get them aligned, but they're making money right now for us. So I don't want to shake things up too much because right now the money's flowing. So how do we do this? How do we do this holistically that makes sense, that doesn't, stop these companies that you own from making that money for you? And I think that's, where we're hopefully going to get to in this conversation at some point. But I agree with Mike, you got to figure out where the IT is being managed. If everybody's managing their own IT, this is going to get complicated. And unfortunately, if that's the case, you're probably going to have to start looking at these organizations individually with an assessment, a framework assessment that fits the type of business, fintech, defense tech, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is, so if we flip this, how would I design security for that? I think you need to have a centralized security and then command where you have an overall philosophy that's communicated and saying, this is our information security plan and process. These are the 10 things that we focus on. And then depending on your resources, you need to have security teams. If the infrastructure is unique to each individual subsidiary, you need to have security in each one of those subsidiaries. If they're not, then you need to focus centrally. And I'm just keep reminded of a company that you and I worked for, Laura, that had grown massively by acquisition, and they had but they had no overall, and everything was aligned. They all did the same thing, so it was all software development, but they had no centralized security planning. They had, a center in Canada somewhere, and they had a center in Washington somewhere, and one in California. And then they had a bunch of distributed people like Laura and I all over the country that were trying to do security. And at times, based on the little fiefdoms that had developed over, well, I'm from this company, and this is how we do it here, and this is how we do it here. There was no overall strategy. So you need to define a top-down strategy for security. It can't be left up to each individual little subsidiary, because at least the philosophy of it, because otherwise management's different, security philosophies are different, and you can wind up getting yourself in a whole lot of trouble. No, great. That's a super good point. You certainly, the parent company needs to, in a basic way say, our information security policy is going to dictate, that we need to have controls based on, industry best practice frameworks and industry best practice cybersecurity protocols, but you need to leave it generic enough that then, hopefully the subsidiaries can then apply themselves in accordance with that, right? So maybe your very top level security policy that you have at the parent company says that each subsidiary is responsible for, instilling a framework that is, applicable to the type of business or something generic like that. And then you can kind of go down to those organizations and do a gap assessment on a framework that does make sense for the organization. If they're doing Department of Defense or government work, NIST CSF is a great one to use, right? And that'll give you some form of a sense of understanding of where that security posture is, where they are in risk management. And you're probably going to be scared. I'm sure that the data coming out of this work is going to be terrifying to you, right? Because you've just acquired a bunch of businesses, or your business is in the business of acquiring businesses. And just like Mike said, that we come from a place that did that, and it's a nightmare. And the moment that you acquire a business, you essentially assume all that risk, right? Because once it comes under the business name,
as an owned entity, a fully or wholly owned entity, now you're in trouble. Now all that risk that company has is now belongs to you. So you need to do a very good analysis before the acquisition to understand what type of risk you're going to take on, and then have a plan ahead of time to start getting that taken care of when this company does onboard. So, I think out of this question is going to come, well, there's going to be gaps. And I think, it's important to understand that you need to do framework assessments based on what's appropriate for the businesses. But also now you're going to have to recommend remediation. That's going to be more difficult, because I think the greater part of this question is there like one budget that the parent company owns that everybody's a part of, or do each of the organizations get their own budgets? How that structure works, and then how are you going to prescribe remediations? As an example, if you've got 100 subsidiaries and 60 of them don't have administrative control over the desktops or the laptops, as an example. Everybody's just running them up with admin controls. How are you going to make all of those businesses aligned to some form of technology or control state that redacts that administrative privileges and leaves the user with the user privilege, but allows them to elevate those privileges as part of a process? How do you, A, facilitate the process to elevate permissions, and B, how do you facilitate the technology to all of these organizations? So that might be everybody kind of buys in a little bit, or, we realize we're going to need, 10,000 licenses. So, you're going to split it up cost amongst each one of your subsidiaries, depending on how many people they have, how many seats they need. They take a bigger chunk of that maybe, but there's a lot of kind of questions that are going to come out of the gap assessment, because you're going to find things, especially if you just acquired businesses. And that's been, the bulk of your work for, 10 years. You're going to acquire businesses that have outdated technologies, that have little to no processes, that have no alignment to any type of framework whatsoever. And, you're going to have to be able to not only identify the framework, do the gap assessment, find the anomalies, write the security plan forward, but then prescribe those technologies as the parent company. I think that's where it's going to get complicated.
Well, I think that brings us back to Star Wars, right? Where we have to have a Death Star to manage everything.
We have to have the Death Star to manage everything. Everything.
That debate is yeah, exactly. The debate is, are you better to have a Death Star, which can't be everywhere at once, or like in the last movie, Last Skywalker, where you have a bunch of Star Destroyers with Death Star tech and the ability to blow up a planet, which gives you greater control.
Well, what budget are you working with? What's your budget? I
was going to say the Empire has unlimited budget, because they just, they just take everything. So but in reality, those budgets are going to look ridiculous. I think everybody knows. Everybody listening to this podcast knows that cybersecurity is, it's going to cost you money, right? It's going to cost you money to make up for the mistakes that you didn't, that these businesses, right? Not necessarily your fault, but everybody inherits problems, right? All of the new security leadership, all the new business leadership, they're all inheriting problems from the last, leadership administration, right? So this stuff is going to cost money. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't plan, right? They don't bake this type of stuff in, right? And you're 10 years down the road and you realize that there's all this stuff you should have been doing this whole time that you're not doing. And now it's this, big giant race to get it retrofitted in, so that we can reduce the risk for the organization. And so that budget's going to have to come from somewhere. Probably, you can ask Senator Palpatine. I'm sure he'll loan you a couple million.
Yeah.
Bold strategy.
It won't be free, but like they say, once you're in Senator Palpatine's pocket, you're not ever coming out.
Well, cybersecurity also can make you money. I would read. There's a book I'd recommend here.
Shameless plug.
that it actually talks about that and how to turn it around, get a return on your investment. So if you're looking at it the right way, shameless plug. We've seen it do amazing things for companies. But going along these lines, we have just, playing devil's advocate here, I guess we have these subsidiaries, they've been rolled up or whatever the case is, even different, don't even have to be subsidiaries, different product lines, different groups working on different things, and they have their own culture. Well, if you're overseeing that and you're responsible for security across this organization, you might have one group that's all about it. Maybe they do DoD work, and they're, I know we got to do this. We're on it. And then you have another group that's maybe they're, some unregulated form of, construction or something that's not dealing with DoD or healthcare or anything like that. And they're like, nah, we're just gonna kind of do our own thing. How do you? I like the idea about the overall philosophy. How do you encourage them gently or with force to get in line with the overall philosophy? I felt
well,
that.
you can use you can use the prison method where you just shank someone for not
I was gonna say waterboarding comes to mind. Drive-by checks come to mind. So the Palpatine electricity.
That's hard to do over GoToMeeting or Zoom or Teams, these days with the remote workforce. So that's out the window. Unfortunately,
but with the gig economy, you may be able to find someone.
Oh, there you go.
Uber. Here's your pizza. Yeah.
Well,
Uber shank.
Uber shank. So that's a really good question, and I think we run into this a lot with some, even our own clients, where we have parts of the organization that just don't really want to buy into the cybersecurity principles that the business is trying to align to. And it's really a cultural issue. You're always going to have, and everybody listening to this knows, you can think of at least two people in your organization that you don't like working with. Like right now, I know two people I love working with. It's like Mike and Zach.
I was going to say there's only three of us on this.
there's only a few of us.
This is going downhill quick.
It is, but I guarantee you can think of at least a couple people in your organization that are, just gonna say no just because they have the freedom to say no. And that's a cultural problem, a hurdle that you got to get over. And I think the only recommendation I have there is just repeated messaging, and then having, meetings with leadership, because once leadership buys in, then it doesn't really matter what, the engineers and the software developers and all those think, because management's bought on now, and management's not going to protect you from your bad decisions anymore. Management's going to try to align up. They're going to try to manage up. And if that philosophy is in place, if that security policy and those frameworks are in place in the right positioning at the top of the organization, the trickle down effect is inevitable. But again, there are going to be individuals that will refuse to drink the Kool-Aid. Now, this isn't the Jim Jones Kool-Aid's going to kill you. This is, like Zach said, this is going to make the organization better, more efficient, more secure, and most certainly more profitable. Because if you're a parent organization that owns 100 subsidiaries, and you think, oh, I'm worth, $100 million or $100 billion or $1 trillion, it doesn't matter, because if somebody comes in to acquire those and they do an actual risk assessment and they do the pre-work for the acquisition, they're going to say, yeah, that's a real nice car you got there, buddy, but it's leaking oil. We've got bad axle bearings. I'm pretty sure it needs a starter from the sound that it made when I tried to turn it on. So they're going to start hassling you now. That $100 billion is going to start looking more like 10 million to, values perceived. And if an acquiring organization does the work, or a lending firm does the work to determine what the real risk is there for your organization in total, you'll probably be shocked to find that it's a lot lower than you think it is, because there's inherent risk there that nobody wants to pay for, right? Because it's something that anybody who buys it's going to have to tackle. If I buy that car, I know if I want to drive it every day, it's going to need new tires, it's going to need new wheel bearings, it's going to need new shocks, it's going to need a new starter, right? And so I go down this list in my head. I'm like, I'm going to spend all this money. And that's what a smart investor is going to do. And a smart investment firm that's partnered with somebody like Silent Sector, that's going to help you identify all the weaknesses before you make the acquisition.
Well, so top-down security programs are the only ones that work. And that comes from ISACA. ISC Squared says the same thing. That basically the only way, if your senior management doesn't buy into it, it can't be a bottom-up push, right? It has to be a top-down, and the entire entity has to buy into it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. We run into issues every once in a while, especially with small companies, where we go through and we put together these, third-party assessment plans and, security process for vetting vendors, and then the CEO signs off on something that nobody's even looked at. You have to. So it has to be, a top-down decision. And so that's why, you need to have a centralized security planning somewhere. And then with marching orders down, and you keep the security, the other way to manage that is to keep the security organization separate from the subsidiary's IT organization. So it is not that security resource is not answerable to whoever's running that subsidiary. They are answerable to the CISO in wherever your headquarters is. That's the chain of command, right?
That's a super good idea to make sure that you have that separation of duties between IT and cybersecurity, especially if you're the parent company. That should probably be rolled up to you so that all the subsidiaries are looking upward for that guidance in the cybersecurity realm. Certainly, and Mike and I know we've spent years screaming from the bottom up. It's just fallen on deaf ears, and so we know, we feel your pain. The trick is to get management, executive leadership, company leadership to adopt these principles, and again, it has to start there and the trickle down. So if you're the parent company and you have all these subsidiaries, you absolutely have to draw a line in the sand and say, look, we don't know what to do, so we're going to align to NIST 853, and everybody else is going to do something that makes sense to them. That's it. They have to do it, right? So I think as long as you're picking you have to pick a team, right? You have to pick a jersey. Wear the jersey and just wear it with pride, and then everybody else that in the organization is going to see that, and they're going to start wearing jerseys too, right? They may not be the same team because they may have to do NIST or they may have to do PCI, but they're going to be wearing that cybersecurity jersey, and it's going to reduce risk for the whole of the organization. But until leadership adopts that concept, it's not going to be possible with as easy as it should be. I'll say that.
I love it.
Sorry,
I love changing the chain of command. We've seen sophisticated organizations do that, where the CISO or chief risk officer reports directly to the board rather than the CEO. That's an excellent combination with changing the philosophy. So you go ahead, Mike. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
Oh no, I was just going to say, it was a smart comment of, if you're fighting that bottom up battle for security, there's only really one cure, and it's Scotch.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you've got to be the drunken master of your environment fighting an uphill battle in the sand. Yeah.
It allows you to sit through meetings of massive stupidity and be like, yeah, okay.
I need more ice. There's only one cure. I thought you were going to say more cowbell, but
well, there's that too.
But I like Scotch better. So, well, outstanding. This has been excellent, and hopefully it's been tremendously helpful for those people within these organizations that have a lot of complexity. Hopefully it helps you understand how to navigate that. And please reach out with any questions. cyberrantspodcast.com has all the information. Of course, you can check out our book and all that, but you can reach us through the website, and then please rate, share, do all those great things, help us spread the word. But before we jump off, Mike, Lauro, you have any final remarks? Anything else? Words of wisdom?
Yeah, I've got some remarks. You probably don't want to hear them, but
let's. Okay, Mike. Mike.
If you're not going to like Lauro's, you're certainly not going to like mine.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say Mike and I have pretty similar remarks. So
I've noticed.
Yeah. So no, in all fairness though, if you are a parent company, you have a lot of subsidiaries, again, pick a jersey to wear, pick a framework that makes sense to the top level businesses that might be easily, transmutable, if you will, to your other subsidiaries, but understand that you need to tackle it one slice at a time. Don't try to boil the whole ocean. It's just going to be a nightmare. Try to do little cups at a time, and then try to be prescriptive to the business type. Remember that if they're the Department of Defense, they probably need a NIST driven. If they're going to be payment related, you should probably work with PCI. If they don't fall into any of those, pick something like a CIS, but take little chunks at a time to make sure that you're giving yourself a less stressful environment. But eventually you're going to build that picture over time, right? That risk picture for the whole organization over time. Just understand that you don't need to do it all at once. Do as much as you can bite off.
Yeah. And the other thing is, inactivity is not an option. You have to do something.
Yeah. I was going to say, remember Conan pushing the giant wheel, right? You got to keep one foot in front of the other. Yeah.
Exactly.
No action is not acceptable.
Didn't we brand the ostrich strategy before?
I think we did.
Cybersecurity, isn't that? So that's not effective, I guess.
Well, my final thought is that the reason that the board doesn't want the risk officer or the chief information security officer in there is that they don't want to be terrified. Again, they have the ostrich syndrome. They'd rather bury their heads in the sand than actually, understand reality. Because nobody likes to be scared, nobody likes to panic, nobody likes to think their business is in high risk. But sometimes you have to hear those things at the highest level so that you can provide the budgets that create action for these people to make the changes that are necessary to reduce that risk.
Yes.
Yep. Now that I know about it, I have to do something about it, right? That's always the fear.
Plausible deniability is not an option.
Exactly.
No longer. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Send us your comments, what you want for topics on the next discussion, and we'll see you soon.
Pick up your copy of the Cyber Rants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the Cyber Rants podcast.